CanMar Morning Talk Show, a fresh take on what's happening in the global cannabis and psychedelic space. Your power shot of cannabis and psychedelics knowledge, featuring the industry's hottest experts, thought leaders, trendsetters, influencers, and celebrities. I'm your host, Melissa. Join me and our esteemed guest as we reflect on the current and future climate of the global cannabis and psychedelics industry. Today's guest is the co-founder and CEO of StrainPrint Technologies, the leading data and analytics technology platform for medical and recreational cannabis use research, which is revolutionizing the scientific understanding of cannabis and its legitimization as a therapy. The enigmatic Andrew Muroff.
So Andrew, I usually like to start off by asking my guests about their cannabis story. You know, we all have one. So tell me a little bit about your personal and professional backstory and how did you get into the cannabis industry?
That's great. Thank you. Again, first of all, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. I think my experience is a lot like a lot of people who are just joining the industry. I've had a career for 25 years in technology. I'm actually an IP lawyer. I was very fortunate when I was in law school studying law, and at the end of 4 degrees in my school career, trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And as luck would have it, in 95, when I was in the middle of school, the internet was sort of becoming commercialized. And so I was fairly technically savvy at that point, and was able to combine my technology background with my legal background, and got very lucky and was able to ride the dot-com boom and as well the dot-com bust. A very big learning experience. And, if you think about what came out of those years, it was, a lot of learnings that came out of it that actually was, you'll see very similar trajectory in the cannabis industry. But for me, I was, by 2012, I had been fortunate to have a number of technology companies that I built and had exited, and was looking for the next thing to do. And, at that time, if you may remember, Colorado and Oregon were really the only markets that were cannabis friendly. And I started doing some work in Colorado, and I started working with one of the very first licensees, one of the very first medical licensees, and helped him get his recreational license move from, as 2012 moved into 2013, move into that. And that, opened my mind. I was like, holy crap, this is dot-com boom all over again. And at the same time, Health Canada issued their guidance that they were going to be changing the old MMPR program in Canada, which was the very first caregiver program starting in 2001. In 2014, they were going to be changing it to the ACMPR program. I have to remember again, there were so many acronyms for it, but the program changed and became commercialized in 2014. And so a couple of my partners in StrainPrint and I had worked together for many years, and we're good friends for many years. In fact, my partner Dave and I have been working together in technology for many years, and he too was working in this space, but he was working in Jamaica and the Netherlands, and I was working in Colorado, Jamaica, and Canada in the cannabis space. And as would have it, as the market sort of evolved in Canada, we were trying to get licenses just like everybody else. That was the big thing back then: get a production license, blah, blah, blah. We failed miserably. And then we realized, why are we trying to be farmers? We know nothing about growing cannabis. We were longtime consumers, and we were very savvy with cannabis as a product. But we were trying to figure out, how do we bring technology into the cannabis world? And very similar to the dot-com boom and bust, was what came out of that bust was SEO and marketing automation, all the things related to data that really helped the internet world evolve to where it is today, right? And so we saw the same trajectory. We also saw the same trajectory with bankers and gangsters sort of being the ones who started the industry. Thankfully, today we have more business operators, but those were years where, there were big stock valuations and those things. By 2015, we were still trying to figure out, how we were going to make our mark in the cannabis space. And I began treating myself with CBD because I had arthritis in my knees. I was a runner my whole life. And by that point, I had both my knees scoped. And really, it was because of those types of injuries that I started using CBD for inflammation. And again, at that time, nobody knew much about, why strains were different, what it meant to be different, how it impacted you differently. And then I had a head injury. And a very bad injury knocked me out of commission for about a year. And during that time, I was treating with CBD. And my doctors were incredibly impressed with how my recovery went. I actually didn't tell them till later on that I was using CBD because I didn't know how they would, feel about that. But it turned out to be a blessing, because what I realized was there were no tools out there to help me to figure out what strains would be best for the things I was treating. And my partner was treating Crohn's for his son. My other partner, who actually came up with the idea for the concept I'll tell you about in a second, she was new to cannabis, and she was treating for PTSD, and she had never been accustomed to using cannabis at all in her life before. So she was really new. My other partner, Dave, and I, we at least knew that every time we used it, it was slightly different or gave us a slightly different effect. And we knew that there were different strains. We knew that there was a concept called indica and sativa. We now know that that's sort of a misnomer for what the effects will be. But at the end of the day, the experience that people were having at that time was, we don't know enough, keep a journal, right? It's all going to be about self-titration and self-experience and understanding on your own what works best for you. And so my partner, Stephanie, kept this journal, and it was like this thick. And when she came over and showed it to me, her and her husband are friends, and my wife and I, and when she came over and showed it to me, I was like, holy crap, this is like amazing, and we were joking. I said, I can't remember who came up with it. We said, you should make an app. And like a week later, her husband, who has an agency, came over and he showed me this prototype, and, light bulb off my head. I'm a data guy. That's what I've been doing my whole life. And same thing, my partner, Dave, he's a data guy. And so we did what tech people did when you can't find the tools you need. And by the way, at that time, really all there was Leafly, right? So Leafly had come up with this concept of their chemical profile wheel, or not wheel, it wasn't a wheel, it was a chart. So I think that was a good start. What it did, unfortunately, was kind of got people in the wrong direction. That sativa and indica were really the indicators for how a product would feel. We know much more about the ingredients now to know how that's changed. But there were no tools out there, so we built it. And we literally built a journal, a digital journal that had some standardization to it. And so it's different than reviews. It was different than Lyft or Leafly or any of those companies that were just, asking people, how did it make you feel? And I'll tell you about a little bit how that is in a second. But the idea was we were creating a tool for ourselves as patients. We're all patients, medical cannabis patients. We're trying to figure out what strains work best. We just created a journal for ourselves, and we put it out there. It's a free app on there, and it took off. And which meant that there were tons of other patients out there who were also looking to journal their outcomes, because they knew it was a personal experience, and they knew that the only way for them to figure out what would work would be to actually track it. And so while I got into the industry thinking I wanted to be a farmer and own a license, with my background being tech and my partner's backgrounds being tech, really we found our sweet spot by bringing that journaling technology into this space. And at the time, we didn't know what it was going to be. We didn't know how much data it was going to gather. We didn't know how we were going to monetize it. We just built a tool because we were patients and we were trying to help other patients. And so that's how we got into this. That's 2016. We launched at the end of 2016, going into 2017. And I can tell you a little bit more about StrainPrint again, but that's how we got into it. We all came about it very altruistically. We were patients. We were looking to help other patients. And at that time, there was no recreational use other than in Colorado. And so, being based in Canada, we had a big leg up, because when we designed the app, we designed it and the journal, we designed it in such a way that we standardized the behaviors that we were gathering. So what symptom are you treating? what's your dose, what's your route of administration, am I smoking a joint, am I taking an edible, and then what product am I using? And if you think back at that time, people still choose their products by name. And what we've learned over time is with respect to the pioneers in our industry, those names are irrelevant. They're useless. As we know, cannabis is a plant, and we've identified 450 plus chemical constituents that could possibly be in a batch of cannabis that is grown. But we know that it's just photosynthesis. So every time you grow it, even if you have controls for temperature and oxygen in the room, and you're using the same seeds from the same mother or the same clones or whatever, at the end of the day, it's going to be slightly different every time. And so what we knew we needed to do was to make sure we captured the batch level information of the product that was being used at the time that somebody was treating. So that's way different than like, for instance, Leafly saying, how did it feel? And somebody responding, dank nugs got me lit for 6 hours, right? So that's great. I mean, it's totally a place for that, but that's not what we do. What we were trying to do is understand the science, and we were able to back into it. And if you think about why that's important, which it is really important, in this industry, it's not like traditional pharma or even traditional CPG, where products are legalized and we know about the products, and so we come to the table with the guidance on how to use the product. That didn't exist at that time. Traditional pharma would do billions of dollars in R&D and come to the market with dosing guidelines. In CPG, you would have done the same thing, just as they did with alcohol. In this space, we actually have to back into the science. So, and the only way to do that, because research has been prohibited for so many years, the only way to understand what's working and what's not, and to discover the science, is through real world evidence. And so that's what we did. We designed a tool that would help gather data through real world evidence. And because we have so many users on it, we have statistical significance. So, today it's over 2.1 million interactions. It's 75,000 patients around the world. But at that time, we created a journal to help to gather that information, so that when a patient tracked their behaviors, we pre-populated the app with all the chemical profile information from the batches. And my partner Stephanie literally sat painstakingly and input every single product that was available in the Canadian market manually into the back end with as much chemical profile information as we could get.
That's a labor of love.
It was a labor of love. We call her our strain keeper. And to be honest, if she hadn't done that, we probably wouldn't be in the position we're in today. So, and also she came up with the idea for creating a digital journal. Kudos to her. And, we're really fortunate that all of us kind of came together at the same time and did this. And, that app launched in 2017. Again, it just took off. We didn't know it was going to take off. At the same time, when we had all this data, we went to the LPs, the original licensed producers in Canada, and we said, hey, why don't you give us your patients, or send your patients our way, and we'll share the data back with you. And, you can imagine the LPs saying, oh, no, we're going to do this ourselves. You know what I mean? And I had seen that picture before in the technology world, where companies are in a business and then they think all of a sudden they're a tech company. It's hard to build this stuff, right? It's complicated. It's complex. First of all, it takes a dedicated focus doing it. And more importantly, once you have it delivered in market, you have to constantly maintain it. It costs millions of dollars to build this kind of stuff. And, I've heard so many LPs saying they're going to conduct their own studies, and every one of them has failed. And that's not to say that we're geniuses. Again, we just took what we knew from other industries and we brought it into here. And, to come full circle to your first question was, how did I get into this industry? Like every other person, we had cannabis experiences, but nobody had cannabis business experience. And so I brought my business experience and my technology experience from other industries into cannabis. So that's how we got it.
100%, and what an amazing story. And I think that's a very interesting thing that you bring up, because a lot of people think, how do I get into the cannabis industry? I've no cannabis industry experience. But it's like any other industry. We need lawyers, tech guys, marketers, all of those kind of things. So we can bring all of that experience here into this industry, which is great, I think.
When we first started, I remember we were interviewed by, I don't know if you remember, another media outlet, but we were interviewed by a media outlet soon after we got into this. And that was the thing that both Dave and I noticed right away. There's opportunity, like you said, for marketers, for accountants, for lawyers, for product managers, for people who want to get into the industry. If you have those skill sets, you got to apply just like every other job. But if you're bringing that skill set into the space, all of a sudden you're going to get this great experience in a brand new industry. But go in knowing that things are still like immature, right? You know, you don't know if your best customer is all of a sudden going to be out of business next week. Sadly, I mean, unfortunately, that's where we are still. And we can talk about that later on as we talk about what the future holds, or even the current environment looks like. But at the end of the day, there's lots of room for anybody. Anybody can get into the space. It doesn't have to be just somebody who knows how to grow plants or somebody who has been growing cannabis plants. It can be, like you said, anybody.
So talking a little bit about StrainPrint, you know, the evolution from, you know, when you launched in 2017 until now, where are you now? What is the current StrainPrint looking like? I know you guys just released a new version. Was it last week or the week before? So tell me a little bit about where things are at and how things have evolved.
Thanks for that opportunity. You know, we started as a medical tracking app. We stayed true to that till today. We built analytics tools that sit on top of the data set in 2018. So 2017, we started capturing this data. The data started growing like crazy. We had no idea that it was even a business. In fact, we were all doing other things at that point. It wasn't until late 2017 that we said, you know, let's make this a business, and let's really focus on helping patients and providing the industry with evidence and data that they don't have. And so we all dedicated our lives to this, and we turned it into a business. We raised some capital, and we built some analytics tools that sit on top of the data. And we built versions of those analytics tools for the regulators, for licensed producers, for clinicians, and then within the app we had tools for the patients to be able to see how well the products were working for them. But then once we had enough data to be able to show how are other people who look like me, or who are my age, or who are my gender, or who are treating the same things I am, what are they using and what's working for them? So it was really the early stages of a true recommendation engine. And it also gave clinicians the ability to track patients in real time so they could make better treatment recommendations. So if a patient's tracking, and when they come in for their next visit, you can see, you know, their full record of how things have worked for them, what products they've used, how many times they used it, blah, blah, blah. If you can see that as a physician, all of a sudden, when you go to turn around to make your next treatment recommendation, you actually have more evidence, and the patient is better off for that. And you're better off for that as the physician too, because you're providing a better service. So, you know, we've evolved now. So, you know, certainly the data has grown like crazy, but we've worked with every major LP in Canada. We've now expanded into the US. We work primarily in medical markets, where there's a little more diligence and consistency in the data that's being provided. Although as we look in the States, as you know, every market is its own island. Every state is its own island. So everybody has their own rules. The biggest challenge with that is that lab testing. So again, what we're doing here is we're combining behavioral data with chemical profile data, and so if the lab data or the product menu data isn't as accurate or consistent as you want it to be, then the output is not going to be garbage out. So the output isn't going to be as great. But what we found is certain states, the medically focused states, we were able to find those that had labs that were not nefarious and a little more consistent. But again, at the end of the day, we know that the lab standardization is still a big thing that we need to get to, and I can talk about that later. That's something that we're pushing very hard for with the regulator. But we've been very fortunate to work with, like I said, all of the LPs, most of the LPs in Canada, with a lot of the big clinic chains in Canada. Health Canada is our customer still today. Health Canada has no way to look at this data. They don't get this data from any other source. So we're showing them real world evidence of how people are actually using it in real time. And for them, what's most interesting and most important is adverse reaction. You know, are people having negative implications as a result of using this? And, you know, happy to report that they're not. For the most part, people are having positive experiences with using cannabis. And on a whole, like just as an average on a whole, because we track 300 different conditions and symptoms across 15 routes of administration. So there's a lot of data on a lot of different ways people are using it for a lot of different things. For the most part, it's positive. And that's a really important thing when a regulator is making, setting regulations or setting rules around how things will be used or what it can be used for. Fast forward into that start. So the analytics tools start in 2018. Fast forward into 2020, we started working in the States with different companies, and we ended up working with one of our biggest customers there is Verano, and with their Move subsidiary in the state of Florida. They've been incredibly successful with using our platform, gathering data with their own patients through what they call the Patient Pioneer Program. And then, so basically, I'm going to take a big step back for 1 second. High level, we built this platform to conduct research, and we started conducting our own research. And then we started licensing out the use of the platform to conduct for others to conduct research with. So like I said, all the LPs were conducting their own data research. In the US with Move, they gathered a ton of data in a very short period of time. And now what they're able to do is use that data through our tools now at their retail locations to make recommendations based on their own products. So their patients, 10,000 patients just from Move have tracked almost 200,000 times on their products across a swath of different indications. They're med tenders. So again, a medical state. Their med tenders are now using their data that they captured to make recommendations based on real world evidence on their own products. So it's pretty powerful. And
it's amazing. It's incredible.
It's a great case study for us, and it's been replicated across the board now. So we're now in a whole whack of states that are primarily medical focused, and we're in Australia, we're in Israel. We have multi-language versions of this of the app, and people are using it to gather data and to use that data for business purposes. And some of that is for better treatment recommendations, and some of that is for understanding what products should they be growing. So a great example is we had a big LP who had acquired a bunch of different companies and had genetics that overlapped, right? So they had products that, we could show that their chemical profiles had overlap, but the experiences that patients were seeing had overlap. So for them, they could do a SKU justification and say, well, we don't need 3 of these. Let's take the one that's the most efficacious and that costs us the least to produce. And so it allowed companies to actually make business decisions that were beyond just helping patients. But since 2018, especially in Canada, the medical market has sort of been abandoned by the way the Cannabis Act has evolved. So at that time, Health Canada the Canadian government legalized recreational use of cannabis, and patients kind of suffered. So especially at the beginning in 2018, at the end of literally right around now, what happened was there wasn't enough. It was a completely different distribution channel. Recreational and medical is completely distribution channel. And so what happened is LPs took their products from the medical side because they had commitments to the provincial retailers and moved them over to the recreational side under different names. And then what happened is we had 400,000 patients in Canada who all of a sudden said, "Where's my product? Like I'm a patient. Where's my Advil? Or where's my Tylenol 3 or whatever?" I'm just using examples, analogies. But all of a sudden, those patients were abandoned. And so understanding how the rec products worked was important, but we weren't really set up at that time to deal with recreational tracking. We had a small function in there that allowed for that, but really we were medically focused. And the reason for that was because recreational users don't really care about tracking. They care about getting high. And that's okay.
Very true.
There's nothing wrong with that. Like, listen, I consider myself a functional stoner and a patient at the same time. And so, we knew we needed to stay focused on patients because patients were the ones who would take the time to actually go and track. And if you ever use the app, it's 10. Once you set it up, it takes 10 seconds to track it. Yeah. Nobody's going to go and get their pen and piece of paper and spend a half hour writing down, what did I use? What are the chemicals that were listed? What are the percentages? That stuff has to be pre-populated in it or nobody's going to come back. So I would say two reasons for our success. One is because we did all that pre-populating with those products. And number two, we had access to those COAs, so certificates of analysis. But when the patients kind of got abandoned and recreational took off in Canada, we looked to the U.S. We looked to the medical markets in the U.S. and we looked to Australia, and we were in South Africa for a bit with a customer. But unfortunately, that market's moving a little bit slower. I think that, as an aside, the big picture to all of this is, we're still in such an immature and early stage of this market that players are going to come and go, and regulations are still changing, and allowable indications for tracking and using cannabis are changing. All those things are changing, and financing is changing. From 2019 on, we saw it early. So in Canada, 2019 on, it's been pretty hard for us here because the ability to access capital has dropped, and that in turn has led to a number of companies closing their doors. But then at the same time, we've got 937 producers in Canada. We had 12 producers in Canada when we started. So imagine your market size. Yeah, but the downside to that, and I'm not even talking retail right now, I'm just talking production. The downside to that is you've got a market size that, let's just say, was $2-3 billion in Canada at one time in the legal market, and with another 3 or 4 billion in the illegal market. A lot of the illegal stuff has moved into the legal market, but still, let's just call it, we're at a $4 billion market. Now, if you have 12 producers who are supplying that market, everybody can be successful. If you have 937 producers trying to service that same size market, nobody's going to have significant enough market share that they can have a commanding lead. And couple that with a pandemic, a recession, all those things, you've got a recipe for consolidation and for, unfortunately, trouble for a lot of companies. And the same thing happened on the retail side in in Canada, actually. 3,700 stores for, at most 7 million consumers. And compare that to the US, they've got 10,000 stores. So, if you think the US is typically about 10 to 1 compared to Canada, we should have 1,000 stores instead of 3,700. And then forget about the fact that the Ontario government and all the governments are competing with the retailers in their markets. So there's so many challenges. Anyway, all this to say, we're at the early stages still in this marketplace. We are in all jurisdictions. We are going to see a lot more pain and suffering, unfortunately, from companies. And I read a stat yesterday that Canadian investors have lost $130 billion so far. That seems like a lot of money. It is a lot of money, don't get me wrong. But if you think about how the internet world started, or how the mining world started, or how any other industry started, there are companies that are going to be successful, and there are companies that aren't going to be successful. So when things turned down in 2019 in our industry, we fortunately had already built our platform and already built our data set. So we were very fortunate to have a head start, a massive head start. And so I think it's been difficult for other players to come into the industry to compete against us. But there are, and by the way, bring it on. There's lots of room for everybody to play in this industry for gathering data. And more importantly, we have to gather data. The more companies out there gathering data, first of all, proves that there is a marketplace for what we do. But more importantly, it helps the industry to understand about patients and consumers and products and regulations. And there's a whole swath of things that come from just having enough data. There's lots of data out there from POS vendors. So if you think about the consumer experience, whether the consumer is educated or not, they go into a store or they go online, they make their purchase, and the POS vendors can see what was bought, and they can see how much was bought, and they can tell you, 70% have used edible or flour, and 30% are using edibles, and blah blah blah. They can see that. There's lots of good data on that. So great providers like Headset and BDS who are providing those things, but nobody's tracking what happens after the product leaves the shelves. Yeah. And that's what we do. And what it helps is for the producer or the retailer to have a 360-degree view. What's been purchased, what's been used, how well did it work? Is it time to come back for more? Right. So it's a great opportunity and a great time for the type of data that we're gathering. It's a great time for companies who are trying to do this, but it's complex, and building technology is complex.
It sounds complex.
It's complex, and that's why I laugh when LPs or agencies say, okay, we're just going to build this ourselves. Okay, have you thought about privacy compliance? Have you thought about database structure? Have you thought about where you need to host? Right? There's so many things. Have you thought about the team you have to build to continue to improve and evolve the product? So all of those things are important, and really you have to be dedicated to that, or you're just going to dilute your focus and you won't succeed. Again, we've always focused on the medical side and the science side. In fact, our main mission is to advance the scientific understanding of cannabis, and I think for that we've definitely excelled. We've worked with like I said, we've worked with all the LPs in Canada. We worked with a ton of MSOs in the States and smaller players in the States. We have a very big player in Australia to work with, same thing in Israel. We're looking to the EU now, but it's always been medically focused until recently. And with the recreational cannabis being consumed, and with the amount of markets that have opened up to adult use, we figured it was time for us to build something that was a little more recreationally focused, because that data is still important, even though it's not going to help necessarily with the science. It's going to help users of products, consumers, and as well it's going to help industry to make business decisions. So like I said, we focus primarily medically, but recently we've started to think recreationally.
And is this something that has come now with the new app updates, the latest version that was released? Is this something that's been the main focus of the new release?
A couple things in the new release. We added a bunch of stuff on the medical side for those people who are running research projects. So there's still a lot of people running research who are trying to understand which of how their products work and how their patients are using their products. There's a lot of people still doing that. So we've added things like a caregiver mode into the app. So if you're treating, if you're caregiving for a minor or an elderly person who are using cannabis for something, for some indication, we've now got tools in the app to focus on that. We've added a new notification system in there. So previously, any notifications or reminders would come through email, but now we've built it right into the app. So natural evolution of the medical side of the app to improve it for research and for studies, because we're starting to run clinical studies now on the platform as well. Yes. But now we've added the recreational focus, which really is not about saying, I'm trying to treat a symptom and how well did this product relieve my symptom, right? So that's a different question than, I'm going out tonight and I'm playing in my band and I need to be creative. Give me something that's going to make me creative, and how well did it make me creative? So that's a little bit different. And so what we did was we created a new workflow in the app. And when you first come in, you can decide if you're tracking for a medical purpose or you're tracking for recreational purpose. And then it takes you through that different flow depending on where you're going.
Amazing. And one thing that you mentioned was the clinical trials, which is something I'm interested in learning more about. Can you share a little bit more information about these clinical trials that you guys are getting involved in?
So the platform is a research platform, which is amazing, and it can be used for so many different things. Clinical trials are just really starting in cannabis. Yeah. It's been prohibited to study it for 80 years, 90 years almost. So what's happened is we have no, I shouldn't say we have no research. We have a ton of research that was done up until the 2000s, mostly trying to prove the negative. And never really was there anything trying to prove the positive, right? It was always the government trying to say, this is bad, we shouldn't be doing this, blah, blah, blah. When in fact, the results were coming back the opposite, and those studies were being sort of pushed down. But if you look on PubMed, there's over 30,000 articles on cannabis, on how cannabis was studied. Even in our own data, our data has been used. This is a really important piece that I've kind of forgotten. Since 2017, we began working with academic partners who publish on the use of cannabis. Because those academic partners didn't have access to data and we had the data, what we would do is we would chunk out, let's say, something related to anxiety or something related to PTSD, and we would pass that data to our research partners at McGill, McMaster, Duke University, Washington State University, academic partners who are focused on studying cannabis. We provide the data to under a research license. They publish, they analyze the data and then publish. And we've been published 9 times in peer-reviewed journal articles on our real-world evidence. We're the only ones who have done that. And we did that purposely because, again, we're trying to advance the science. And that then gave us the credibility now to work with companies like Bayer or Apotex or Boston Beer Company or Mandera Pharma. So we're now working with big pharma and with CPG companies who are trying to design products. And if you're designing a product for a targeted outcome or a targeted effect, I'll just give you an example. In the CPG world, consumer packaged goods world, they would never consider putting out a product without doing millions of dollars in consumer research. They would never consider that. But in cannabis, people throw out products all the time, and because they can't make claims, they just throw the product out, and everything they put on the shelves can sell. But now, there's over 1,000 CBD companies out there. How do you differentiate CBD from CBD? You can't talk about your product. It's super hard to build a brand. So how do you differentiate? And you differentiate by data, right? So you track, or you either design a product to be for a particular thing based on data, or you track that product in market and you report back on how that product is working for users. And so that's what we're seeing today is a lot of companies now using our data to design products. And so we license uniquely. We just created 12 recipes for a company called Kinlock in BC, based out of BC, and they're targeted products and they're super cool and they work. And we've done that for Bayer, we've done that for big pharma, we've done that for CPG, like I said, for companies again who are looking to create targeted outcome or targeted effect products. And so that's a huge thing. That has been a big evolution for us in the last couple of years as well. I would say we equally get asked to do research, a platform for research, as we do get asked to use the data to conduct analysis for recipes. But in terms of the clinical trials are really just starting now. They're very complex. And the challenge with clinical trials in cannabis is not a single molecule. So it can't be tested the same way in a clinical trial. Clinical trials are super expensive. They typically have a low number of users, and it's a very narrow focus, right? Usually on a single molecule or single what we call API. And with real world evidence, or combining real world evidence with those control type studies, we're really able to elevate this more. So governments and health regulatory agencies across the world, in Canada, the US, and Europe, are all now starting to accept real world evidence in certain cases, more so than they used to, for drug development. And so that's a huge thing. That's a huge shift. And we're running a study in California right now with a company that's running, it's actually over 5 states. There's 37 different cohorts there. Each cohort has 7 different products for the indication in the cohort. And I think it's 5 different physicians across those states. So very complex study. I mean, how would you ever run a clinical trial? You could never afford to run that type of clinical trial. Remember, we don't have big pharma funding these R&D efforts. We have LPs who aren't making money and who are reliant on external capital all the time. So we provide a really reasonable solution that gets them sort of 90% of the way to a clinical trial. So they run the controlled version of the study along with the regular tracking in the app. So not only can our app do our regular workflow tracking, but we now can run validated questionnaires and frequent surveys and follow-on questions that are customized for whatever it is you want to study. So we've done that across the board for many things. And so we produce research for people who engage us to do that. We give the platform away to, we don't give it away. We license the platform for use for companies who want to conduct their research, from anything from just basic tracking all the way up to clinically focused studies. And as well, we do recipes.
Amazing.
So that's the history. That's the history and where we've come. So I apologize for cutting you off, but I speak a lot.
Yeah, no, it's great. I love it. This is very interesting. You know, this is a whole different side of the industry. And that's also what I love about the cannabis industry personally, is because there are so many different moving parts that bring everything together to build out this industry. So it's very interesting for me. I'd actually like to just pivot back to something you said previously about Australia and Israel, you know, getting involved in those markets. Obviously, those are those kind of emerging markets, do you think? What do you think the kind of climate is there in comparison to, let's say, Canada or the US?
Sure. So Canada, legal for medical and recreational use. US, 52 different countries with, 50 states, but I call them countries within a country. So every single one of them is its own market. I think now we're up to 29 recreational markets. 90%, I think 90% of the people in the United States live in a market that cannabis is legal in some form. And so that's also unique, that there are markets that are only medical, there are markets that are both medical and recreational, there are markets that are only recreational, and there are markets that are CBD only. So lots of complication within that market. Australia is unique. It is a big country that's medical only right now and very tightly regulated. You can't even show the products in our app unless you're a registered patient. So you can't even list products. You can't even list cannabis products anywhere. I think that's another piece to understand, that I think people should understand, is different countries are at different stages of evolution in terms of acceptance and stigma. Australia is still medically focused, but it seems to be evolving, and I think in some years they'll probably get a little more lax on their medical side in terms of what can be used for, what cannabis be used for, as well as how patients can discover products. So that's coming. And then in Israel, it's the same thing. It's purely medically focused. 90% of it is focused on PTSD. They do a lot of research on the products, but they haven't been doing a lot of research on patients using those products, right? So there's a lot of product research and a lot of information about identifying and isolating the chemical constituents. In fact, our partner in Israel is Lumir Lab. Lumir Hannes is a scientist who was the person who discovered. He worked with Dr. Meshulam, and he's the person who discovered anandamide. So there's a lot of pedigree in that country, and there's a lot of patients in that country. So again, medically focused, but a smaller market, a much smaller market. The EU is a really interesting place right now. You hear probably a lot in the news about countries who are legalizing the medical use or are thinking about legalizing. Germany, obviously, at the top of that. Germany is poised to be a huge market. The challenge is that once you legalize, it's one thing, but when the time from when they legalize to the time that they put the set of rules in place, to the time that they put out the licenses, to the time that the product is grown, and then the product's actually available to the consumer, like Germany's still doing this. They've been talking about it for 3 years. They really don't have they don't have their own production at scale yet. So they import a lot of stuff from Canada and other places. Yes. Latin America, Colombia is a very big market. Uruguay was actually the first country to legalize recreationally. But again, Uruguay, kudos to them. They were the first ones to do it, but very slow moving, right? Governments, while they've legalized, it's not always perfectly available for the consumers to get the products. UK is a great point for that. So in the UK, it's medically available, it's medically legal, but again, it's really hard for patients to get products. And the ones who are suffering are the patient, right? So children with epilepsy are the biggest vocal users in the UK for their lack of access. But there's lots of others as well. There's lots of women's health issues that could be solved with cannabis, or not solved, but helped by cannabis. And those people are very vocal. Those people, that segment of the community is very vocal, and rightly so. Again, from the time you regulate to the time the product actually hits the consumers can be years. And so we look at the EU and the UK, and South Africa is a great example as well. A lot has to happen in so many different ways, a myriad of things, like regulation, access to capital to be able to build production facilities, regulation for import export in the meantime, getting licenses for retail. How are you going to retail? Is it going to be online? Setting all that up. And then having doctors, we haven't even talked about doctors yet, but having doctors comfortable with prescribing, that's a whole other ball of wax, right? So across the world, and this is a good segue right now, across the world, the physician community, when cannabis first gets legalized, they kind of hold up their hands and they say, whoa, you know, we've been taught this is bad our whole life. We don't know anything about it. And in fact, even today, there's very little education in the medical schools about cannabis. We have an endocannabinoid system in our body, and everybody does, and it regulates sleep and metabolism and things that are fundamental to homeostasis. And yet it's not taught in the medical schools. So physicians actually don't know its benefit. And at the same time, regulators still call cannabis a medication of last resort. So doctors have no problem prescribing an opiate, but they're so cautious about giving somebody a plant, right? Yeah. No problem giving you a synthetic drug that was designed in a laboratory, but oh my gosh, don't let them touch a plant.
How dare you? How dare you touch a plant?
Yeah, and the plants that have been used for 10,000 years, right? Like, so anyway, long story short is education, and physician education in particular, so important. There needs to be a wholesale change in the way that medical schools train their doctors and the way that medical associations treat their doctors. So medical associations hold back physicians in certain markets from actually prescribing because it's frowned upon. So we need to change. That's the stigma that I'm it is most important to me. You know, my parents are always going to have the same opinion on cannabis. They're always going to say, hey, you know, it's that's for stoners. But, you know, we need the physicians to understand there are 35,000 published articles on cannabis, and there's very little negative impact on using cannabis. It shouldn't be a medication of last resort. It should be the first resort, right? So, you know, that opens up a whole series of questions like, how do we get insurance to cover it? Like every other medication. So in Canada, I'll give you another challenge. In Canada, cannabis is the only medication that's not covered by insurance and gets taxed. Patients suffer.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of evolution that will need to happen, you know, to get us where we really need to be. And, you know, carrying on our conversation around the stigma and education, it's also, and because you know, this is a tech company that you're running here. So talking about cannabis, especially online, you know, in the online space, we're still seeing a lot of kind of shadow banning and that sort of thing on social media. So what are your thoughts on cannabis in the tech space as somebody in the cannabis tech space, and what do you think of the future of this, of cannabis in the tech space?
We always forget, when I'm at cannabis events or even just talking amongst our, we always forget that most people don't use cannabis, right? Because in our world, everybody uses cannabis. and for whatever reason, medical reason, recreational, in our world, everybody's using it. So there's less of a stigma in our world in our day-to-day, but we have to keep reminding ourselves that it is out there. But the reality is, it's like any industry. You know, you're going to have the early adopters. You're going to eventually cross the chasm and reach a crevasse. I would say we're still crossing the chasm. We've already had our early adopters, and as a technology company, we've already, you know, made the investment in the infrastructure, and we've already built the data set, and we've already been out there, you know, expanding into different markets. Now it's really just about having that market mature, and being able to integrate with other components in the industry is also really important. We're seeing that more and more and more and more. And you know, one of your questions, I think, you sent over earlier was, we just got back from the MJ BizCon show in Vegas, and that was my sixth MJ BizCon over the last number of years. It was, first of all, MJ BizCon is the biggest show of all the shows in the world. This was the biggest one of any MJ BizCon I've been to, which was great to see, especially after, you know, being locked down for a number of years.
Yeah.
You know, so many people came out to learn about it or are in it, and they wanted to be a part of it. For us, that show was a little more recreationally focused, but we did see quite a few people focused on research. which is really great to see.
Amazing.
So the industry is, there's no question. I mean, we're finally getting the U.S. government to wrap its head around it, and it's so political, and it's a waste of resources. It's a waste of it's detrimental to the constituents in the U.S. There's so many reasons why they need to get through that, but they will. It's just who knows how long it's going to take. And I mean, I'll give you another example of how dumb this is. So we used to bank with one of the big 5 banks in Canada. And actually, I don't mind talking about it because their name, because frankly, I'm not very happy with them. RBC is the 5th largest bank in the world, 5th largest bank, biggest bank in Canada. We've been banking with them since we started. My partners and I have all banked with RBC our whole lives. In late last year, we have customers in the US, we have customers in Australia, customers in Israel, customers in Canada. We got a payment in from a US customer. And so RBC reached out and they said, who are these guys? And we said, oh, they're a licensed producer in the state of California, where it's been legal since 1996. They are fully under state law and blah, blah, blah. They buy data from us. They don't even buy, we don't produce cannabis. We don't sell cannabis. We don't touch cannabis. We don't touch anything from cannabis. And so they said, oh, yes, but from a federal perspective, when they pay you, those are proceeds from a crime. So I'm a US lawyer. So that is accurate. That's 100% accurate. But I'm in Canada and I have customers from all over the world and I'm only selling data. So technically they're right. Those are proceeds from a crime. And so RBC said to me, you have to stop doing business with anybody in the US. And we said, what? That's like half our business. You want me to just stop doing business? So their reasoning is sound, which is that it is a proceeds of a crime, but it's the wrong side of history, right? We know the direction this is moving. Anyway, they canned us. They said, we're not prepared to take a risk to work with you. And the reason RBC, a Canadian bank, would say that to a Canadian company is because they have a subsidiary in the US that's federally licensed. So they don't want to go outside the federal government in the US and take a risk just for a little StrainPrint. I said, well, what about Microsoft? I said, all these companies in the US, for sure they're using Excel because they're not allowed to bank online. So for sure they're using Excel. Should Microsoft be shut down? You're not allowed to bank with Microsoft. Or what about McDonald's? How about the employees who got paid in cash, right? And they go to McDonald's to eat their lunch. Are you going to stop doing business with McDonald's? So anyway, at the end of the day, these are challenges that we're just going to continue to face in this maturing market. But it goes to show you how backward it's been for so many years and how much more there still is to get over. And we're not alone, by the way. We're just one of many. In the U.S., like I said, in the U.S., there's no federally chartered bank that would, even the bigger banks in the States, they won't touch you. They won't touch anything cannabis related. And at any given day, the bank could just come and say, we're no longer working with you. And then they have to go find someone else to bank with, which delays payments to me and to anybody else who they're paying. So there's so many challenges like that are not necessarily stigma, but are purely driven by the fact that the US government hasn't changed their stance on this. And it's coming. It's slow, it's laborious, it's political, but it's coming. And but what it does impact every other market in the world.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And, on that note, of course, we're in the situation that we're in now. What about the future? What do you see happening in the next 5 to 10 years in the industry, whether that's in Canada, whether that's globally, whether that's for StrainPrint? What's in it for the future, in your opinion, Andrew?
So first and foremost, products. It's no longer okay to just say, I'm growing OG Kush. And sure, there's always going to be a segment that, in fact, flower is still the largest segment, but OG Kush is just a name, right? And it used to mean something, right? But now it's been hybrid over time so many times. This person's OG Kush is not the same as this person's OG Kush, and so we have to get better product definition, and we're starting to see it. We're also going to start to see products that are designed for particular outcomes. And so that means extracting and downstream products like edibles and pills and drinks and so many things that are not just flower. Again, there's always going to be that flower segment. That is an important segment. I'm a big flower consumer, but I also enjoy using it for medical purposes, using something that's targeted, right? Whether it's an oil or a patch, as I said. So I think that's going to be one of the biggest things that happens is companies need to differentiate between themselves now. It's no longer fair to just say, I'm a CBD company. I think regulations are going to change to allow companies to market a little bit more. In the US, they can market and do anything they want as long as they're not making claims. But in Canada, that's going to change. In other markets, it'll change as well. Clinical trials are just starting. They're going to take 5 to 10 years. In the meantime, research is still really important. Companies are going to conduct more and more real world evidence with us and with other companies that are going to be out there, that are either out there today or that are going to grow into it, because it is going to be a real market. And I think you're going to see consumers be more open to cannabis as a first stage medication, and therapeutically, it'll be available in therapeutic stores, not necessarily behind the counter. So I think all those things are going to evolve. This is going to become, truthfully, the big picture is this. On the medical side, it's going to move to big pharma, who's going to actually, run it from a medical perspective properly, with proper research, with the guidelines. And then on the recreational side, it's going to be consumer packaged goods companies who are going to, ultimately control this, right? So at some point, when the U.S. government, gets its act together, the big CPG companies are just going to buy up the brands, right? Until then, they're going to have to wait, but they'll just buy up the brands because they can push it out to way more consumers than an individual could, than a small state company could. In the U.S., I hope you don't mind if I keep going, but in the U.S., I do have a lot to say on this. In the U.S., at some point when it either gets descheduled or decriminalized or however, sorry, not descheduled, rescheduled or descheduled or legalized, whatever happens, whatever the future is, ultimately we're going to be able to cross state lines. And so, all the big MSOs who have production facilities in every state and retail locations in every state, mostly on the production side, they're going to consolidate that. So instead of having 13 different production facilities in your portfolio, you'll have 2, and that'll service all the states. So that type of efficiency will come up. I think we'll see changes to the tax code, which are really important for U.S. companies. We'll see consumers become more savvy, for sure, like in every industry. And unfortunately, we're going to see a massive consolidation. So, not everybody's going to make it, and the big companies will end up buying little companies. In Canada, we don't need 937 producers. We need maybe 5 or 10. Yeah. And the other thing is, I think production is going to move once borders open up a little bit more for export and import. We're going to see production move to the cheapest, most effective markets. So, why are we growing cannabis in Canada? Shouldn't cannabis be grown in Jamaica or in somewhere where we have 300 days of sunlight? Lots of reasons why it could need to be endorsed, but I think you're going to see production move to markets that are more cost effective, just like auto industry, just like every other industry in the world, right?
Makes sense. Yeah, absolutely. Makes 100% sense. Do you think there are any kind of pitfalls, with big pharma getting involved in cannabis, or these big companies kind of taking over? Do you think that there are some pitfalls to this, or do you think it's mostly a positive thing in your opinion?
I think 100% is a positive thing. I think people are afraid of it because big pharma typically controls IP and nobody else can touch it. It's harder to control IP in this space because cannabis is, you can say, I need this much CBN, I need this much CBD, I need this much THCV, I need, all these chemical components in one API, and then a pharma might own the IP around that API, but somebody could change it slightly and then it's a different product. So it'll be harder for pharma to get in from that perspective. But at the end of the day, they're going to bring the clinical rigor. They're going to bring the consistency, the shelf stability. They're going to bring all those things to the medical side, which is much needed because that's how we get doctors to get comfortable with it. And then on the CPG side, it's just like every other industry. We're going to have big companies that own this stuff. That's just the way it goes. Economics force it that way. So the little mom and pop producer, your heart kind of, bleeds for them because they're probably going to get pushed out. There will be craft producers. We have a ton of craft producers who are great. I think it'll be like the beer industry in Canada. You'll see, tons of players that get consolidated down to a few niche players and a couple of big players.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think it's just the way the cookie crumbles, right? That's just the way it works. If we want wide scale global kind of legalization, we just have to accept these certain things like this, right? Sorry, please continue. Go for it.
I was just going to say, for those people who are against big pharma being involved, they have nothing to worry about, because they're always still going to be able to get the flower they want to buy from the store they want to, or the dabs. They're always going to be able to get that. Big pharma isn't going to encroach on that. That's not their thing, right? They'll still always be. So I don't think there's anything to fear from that. I think it's only going to improve things. It's going to make it better for consumers and better for patients for sure.
Absolutely. And what about let's say we're nearly at the end of this year. Can you believe it? It's really just flown by 2022. So what is on the cards for StrainPrint in 2023? Any goals that you have for the business going forward this next year?
So we're going to be rolling out our recreational tools to the dispensary world in the US. So research tools for them to be able to understand how their products are working in market and see that in real time and build engagement. So one piece we didn't talk about is we have a full-blown loyalty program built into the platform and functionality that these dispensaries can use, along with the ability to conduct this research. We're going to continue to build out our medical side and our medical tracking, and continue to do research with lots of big companies that are both pharma focused and LP or MSO focused. We continue to work with the regulators and provide them with adverse reaction information, and we are starting now to pitch to become the national registries in a number of different countries. So I think that's a huge step up and a much needed thing for every country to be able to. And it isn't about tracking individuals and understanding who's using an illegal substance. It's about understanding how products are being used in real time, so we can understand the science and we can make sure that it's safe and we can make sure that it's most efficacious. And so a national registry makes a lot of sense, and countries are starting to recognize that. And thankfully, we're one of the few platforms that is actually capable of doing that.
Incredible. Yeah, that's amazing. That's really wonderful. And I was reading something on your LinkedIn page that you're a bit of a secret rock star. You build custom electric guitars, you play in some rock bands. I had to ask about that.
This is one. I made this for my daughter. Her name is Jasmine.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah, I've been playing for 40 a lot of years. I'm old. I've been playing since I was 8 years old. I've toured. I've produced a number, quite a bit of stuff, and I have a studio in my home, and I make electric guitars, and awesome. That kind of keeps me sane. Listen, cannabis and music have gone together since the beginning of time. So, in fact, we're running a study right now on cannabis for creativity. So check it out if you feel like it. But it's as we all know, cannabis and the arts go together hand in hand, and music is such an important part of my world, and everybody's stressed and in their day to day, and everybody's been through a lot over the last couple of years. So anything we can do to help ourselves and help others through music is top of my list. So I want to give one quick plug. When the pandemic started, I went out on my front porch and I played guitar for my neighbors, and I happen to have a fairly good sized porch. And the next week I had another friend come over and we both played guitar for some neighbors. And then by the 6th week, we had a full band performing for 150 people in the street. And we played 30 shows over, it was amazing. We played 30 shows over 2 years throughout the pandemic, throughout the lockdown. And now we're a band. And these are just my friends who I've been playing with for years. We all came together, and it's very pure. It's about the music. Nobody's making money off of this. It's all about, providing something to the community to help everybody, get through the craziness of the last couple of years.
I love that. Music and cannabis bringing people together, right? It's a match made in heaven.
Exactly.
And also, I just have to notice your little Grogu figurine. I'm also a very big Star Wars fan, so I instantly saw that, it was like a beeline for me. I've actually got a Chewbacca tattoo.
Oh my gosh. Well, I can tell you this, we're going to have to, carry this forward into another conversation, because we could have a whole show. Hang on one second. I do have to show you this. Yeah.
I'm so jealous.
So, I've been a Star Wars fan all my life, but in the last number of years, my son is old enough to appreciate it, and we're just all Star Wars all the time in our house right now.
I love that. I have a whole shelf in my living room that's full of all my Star Wars figurines and stuff. So I love that. We'll definitely have to continue this offline or whatever the case may be. But
I love it.
Any final thoughts before we end? Anything else you would like to share with the audience, with the CanMar audience?
Well, first of all, thank you, CanMar, for creating an audience and for bringing community together. At one time, we tried to do something similar. It's hard to do, right? It's hard to keep people engaged, and it's hard to keep people. So thank you to the CanMar audience for listening, and thank you for you guys for bringing the CanMar audience together. Again, I think the more we can do together, the more we lift the industry. So that's why I'm really grateful for you to hear my story and to give me the opportunity to speak about it.
Thank you so much, Andrew. It was really great to have you on the show.
And that's a wrap. Thanks for watching or listening to the CanMar Morning Talk Show. Join us next time for your weekly dose of cannabis and psychedelics updates from the industry's experts. But wait, before you go, did you know that CanMar is leading global change within the cannabis and psychedelics industry? We are building customizable ecosystems, providing solutions to recruitment, offering regulatory and compliance services, and community hub for the global network. Some might say we are the future. If you haven't already, download the CanMar Hub app or check out our website at canmar.io to see what we're getting up to. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please hit that subscribe button below to hear more juicy insights from the movers and shakers of the cannabis and psychedelics industry. Until next time, stay dope.